Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you so much for joining us today. We have several panelists and co-hosts, as you guys may see. So I'm going to go ahead and just do introductions. My name is Katie Egan, and I am the CEO of CourseArc. I'm so excited to present to you guys principles and best practices for using visuals in course design. So what we have planned today, we have a three-part presentation. So the first part is going to be done by Todd Douglas. He's a graphic designer in Baltimore, Maryland, and has worked with CourseArc for 5 years. He is going to talk about, as you can see here, he's going to talk about design tips and basics from a non-designer's perspective. And then we have Bethany Simonich. She is the Director of Research and Innovation for Quality Matters, where she helps provide research-based tools, ideas, and solutions. And so Bethany is going to follow up Todd's presentation and talk really more about the pedagogy and best practices for using visuals in course design. And then we, of course, have saved time at the end for questions. So just a couple of quick housekeeping things before I pass it off to Todd. So first of all, we do have a lot of attendees here. So we want to encourage you, we are going to take questions at the end. So we want to encourage you to use the Q&A. If you look at the bottom of your screen, there's a little Q&A feature, and you can enter your questions, and that way we can address them after the two presentations are done. You're also welcome to send a message, a direct message to the hosts and the panelists. So if there is something you're a little nervous that it might not get addressed, or maybe you want us to follow up because you're not sure if you can stay until the end, you're welcome to send your question and we will follow up with you directly. So I just wanted to make sure that you guys know that. I have with me from my team, I have Stacy. Christine's going to be here momentarily. We will be looking at both the chat and the Q&A while Todd and Bethany are presenting. And then we also have Jim from Quality Matters, and he'll be helping us to address any questions as well. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and turn my camera off so it's not distracting, and I'm going to turn it over to Todd.
Thank you, Katie. Can you hear me okay? Okay, great. Thumbs up from Katie. Hi, everybody. Welcome. Thanks for letting me be here with you today. I appreciate this opportunity to pass along some of what I do every day. So let's go ahead and get started. Where's my thing? There we go. So for me, I consider my job as a graphic designer be kind of taking a lump of information and ideas and really just organizing it and making it presentable, because it might be used online or print or wherever. This is not a complete survey or list of all things graphic design. Rather, this is really a few material points just gleaned over a 30 some odd year career. So a few fundamental points. To me, the organizational elements of design are like construction. If you want to build a wall, you start with your studs, the wood or metal studs, and then at that point you add the drywall and the paint. So when I studied graphic design, I would say the grid was really my aha moment. And I appreciated it because when you're faced with this huge amount of content, having an underlying grid is just a really big help. And it's not just for organization, but also it helps you maintain consistency throughout the entire project, especially if it's a large one. And, frankly, it just kind of helps simplify some of my design decisions too. Grids may look rigid, but they are made to be broken for visual interest. Alignment, just different types of alignment, and that applies to, not just type, but photos, graphics, whatever's on the layout. Visual hierarchy was another aha moment for me, because this is where the designer can prioritize the information and really guide your attention. And more importantly for users, it's a visual cue to what's most important. So, if I was going to look at one of these, like this online ad, the picture is going to probably draw your attention first, along with this highlighted thing to make it convenient, as well as then the big type about the low rate and the actual low rates in color and the call to action down here. So it's just a way to kind of get people to pay attention to what you want them to pay attention to. A quick example of hierarchy, this is all just plain text and everything is pretty much just equal, but by styling it and formatting it, now we're adding some structure and context, and it also just makes it easier to scan. So to me, elements of arrangement would be like table settings, where you've always got the same things to work with, utensils, napkins, plates, but just with those basic items, there's really unlimited creative opportunities. So to me, scale, size, proportion, they're all very tightly related, and in various ways it can be used to add impact or just kind of reinforce a message, or even just to provide useful context. Balance, this would be where we look at things like symmetry and asymmetry. And I call this discord because it's visually balanced, but you've got this really big, dark, simple, clean area, then the very complex, colorful area, and they just kind of visually balance each other out. And balance can relate to what designers call visual tension, and it's when you do something different, maybe kind of unexpected for impact. So using an extreme crop or some other technique to attract attention. White space to highlight or focus on something or simplify things. Space can can make text more readable or a little more inviting. White space is good if you have a lot of elements on a page, because you want to provide a little visual resting space for the viewer's eyes. And proximity, that's showing relationships between elements on a page. So that would be, associating, linking, setting things off. So this is what we call this a gray wall. It's just a mass of text. And it can appear daunting and turn off readers. But we can make it more approachable just by opening it up a little bit, adding a little bit of white space. And you can see here for visual interest, we're breaking the grid. For a design to really be effective, we need to understand how it's going to be presented. And to me, this would be like when you buy a car, because you really need to know what you're going to use the car for before you start shopping. So how will it be used? Is it going to be in print or on a screen? Is it close up or is it far away? Is it moving? Is it static? Will users be interacting with it? I mean, all of these factors will inform your design decisions. Structure, so if it's a series or hyperlinked situations, you need to establish standards and conventions that make it easy for users to navigate and understand across, especially if it's a large project. If it's something that's standalone, maybe it's something where you have to be more creative, or it requires that the mood be more quickly established. And the intent, what's the goal or objective? If you're going to mobilize or motivate people, then the design may need to have more impact to get them interested. But to show people how to assemble a product, then the design should be more simple and clear. Quick example, how you might read an article in print with columns and spot images. But if it's going to go online, let's simplify it. Let's enlarge it, make the type cleaner, just because this type of thing that might be read on a phone. So these are the parts that kind of make the engine run. And color is what really establishes a mood and what really connects with viewers a lot. So just technically looking at color, I mean, there's a lot of different ways to relate and classify colors, usually in the format of a color wheel. And color theory can be really complex, like physics complex. But for everyday use, I think a great way to really just kind of understand how colors work and how they work together is just go to an online color generator. Here's one from Canva. Here's a good one from Adobe too. And just play around, just move things around to get you to just see how things change. And they have some libraries that you can use to even just as a jumping off point. Really important is how we see colors. Right now we're looking at screens, and so the light is being emitted. That's why what's on your screen is usually very vivid, very saturated. Whereas in print, we're looking at reflected light. And this is where colors are absorbed, being different types of light or different amounts of light. I'm not a color theory expert, but just know that screen colors and print colors are completely separate. And many a client has been disappointed when a color they've seen on screen just doesn't quite look the same way in print. And color can say a lot in a design. I think it's kind of interesting how we perceive and interpret colors and how they attract our attention and evoke all these different types of emotions. And especially in branding, where colors are combined with shapes, are incredibly effective. And I suspect you probably know most or all of these brands without seeing a single bit of text. Typography, this is really important, obviously, for readability, but also know that type can subtly communicate a tone of voice. So the basic categories of type, the serif, where you have the little spurs here, and the sans serif without spurs. Display, this is also sometimes called decorative. This is not really meant for body type. I mean, you might use these, or you would use these typically for body type, but display or decorative type is usually intended to be used for larger, like, headlines and such, because that's where the displays type is where type really kind of takes on a personality. Script, pretty much, what you'd expect. There's a lot of handwriting types of fonts out now, and I've kind of put them in the same category. Monospace, I don't know if it's really used much. Sometimes I use it in annual reports for tables and such. Anybody who's used a word processor is already going to be familiar with all of these attributes. I would say letter spacing probably does not get used a lot, but designers frequently rely on it, especially for larger headlines or something, just to make the type more legible at the different sizes and also visually pleasing. If you have really big type and it's too spaced out and you're looking at it close, well, then it just kind of looks weird. So this is sort of what I meant with display or decorative typefaces having a personality. It can create a very distinct visual message. And typography allows you to project certain visual cues. I've always said that people may not be able to really verbalize exactly why your design isn't working, but they just intrinsically know something is off. So you may be looking at this and not saying that script font is clearly not representative of a giant movie gorilla, but it's just going to feel like something's not quite right. And especially when you see it with a better treatment or the treatment that was ultimately used. So all of that's just a way to say that the personality of typography can really be a factor in communication. I think images are what really draw people into your design, and that makes selecting good ones important. A lot of different types of images, what you expect. Photo illustration, so this would be like where you're compositing different images together to create a new one, and that can be really incredibly effective. Illustration would be, can be fine art or graphic. I think of charts as a form of image just because you can get kind of creative with them as long as you don't mess with the data, really. And in our online world, I even consider video an image. The main thing to remember with images is the format. And generally photos are made up of pixels. And so if you scale the image up, then the pixels are going to become more obvious. Vector is for images like graphics, like logos and such. And this is more mathematical paths and curves. So we're not talking pixels, meaning that when you scale this up or down, it's going to be very crisp and very sharp. And all of this kind of leads a little bit into a whole separate topic of high resolution and low resolution images. And just suffice it to say that usually online images are displayed in low resolution, and print images tend to look best in higher resolution. You know, stock images, they're really great, convenient, very reasonably priced, especially, you know, I started pre-internet. Did I hear some gasps? You know, but back then it was really expensive and very convoluted, even just to acquire them. So, you know, nowadays I pour through tons of stock images for client projects, and there's definitely some gotchas to bear in mind. You know, I think the biggest knock on them is how they, you know, they look junky or kind of low rate. Diversity, I think it might be getting a little bit better, but you still have to look pretty hard. Cultural regional cues would be just, you know, sometimes a fair number actually of stock images are shot overseas. So, you know, depending on your audience, there might be certain visual things that don't translate. Overused, again, I'm always looking at stock images and I see them in the wild, and so I recognize the models, and you know, in one shot they're a doctor, and another shot she's like an irate customer. So I don't know if there's really a lot you can do about that, but it's just something to be aware of. So hey, what makes a great stock photo? This is one person's opinion. The top row here, if you look at it closely, the lighting really has much more depth, and especially the models, you look at them and their body language and their expressions are just so much more genuine and interesting. Whereas if you look at the bottom row, it's very flat. The lighting's flat. You know, it feels kind of phony the way they're posed or dressed, and you know, just kind of uninteresting, and even just kind of look a little weird. If you look at, I can tell this is like two different images composited together because the depth of field is wrong and lighting is wrong. So someone said that it might be helpful to show some before and after work. So let me just preface that by saying that I do a lot of PowerPoint work for clients, excuse me. And specifically what they'll do is they'll send me a slide deck, and then they'll ask me to give it a design cleanup or design makeover. So I have a few of those before and afters that I can show you just to get a sense of the role of design. This would be like adding some impact where you just have a static dull list, and you know, we're dressing it up with some color and images and other creative elements. Just make it a little more interesting, draw people in a little bit more. You know, back to my hobby horse of stock photos. You know, I think one of the things with stock photos is it really requires some time and attention to select good stock images. And sometimes that's a luxury we don't have. But I think, you know, if you do spend the time looking for them, you will be rewarded. Upgrading graphics just to make them more memorable. And clients love logos. They just love logos. I've made my peace with that, so I simply just make them look more organized. A few quick tips. Just keep it simple, and don't make things harder for yourself, but more importantly, don't make it harder for your audience. Borrow if you know, if it works and it's appropriate for your situation, why not use it? There's no such thing as an original idea. Clear and trendy, or clear and direct. I'm not trying to win creative awards or anything like that. I'm just trying to do work that communicates well and is clear for my clients. Grids, white space, density. We talked about a lot of this. Accessibility. So this is something that I've become much more in tune with since I've been working with CourseArc. So like if we're creating themes in CourseArc, I'm always checking the colors in a color contrast checker online. Because you can't make the body text like a light pastel color, because it's not going to be readable for a lot of people, but especially for people who might have vision issues. Design for novices. I think what I mean here is that you know how you just work on a project long enough and you just start to kind of assume people know what you know or see what you see. So it's like, can an outsider kind of get what you're doing? Can you show a design to your mom and kind of understand what's happening? Backups, there's no controversy there. Keep them, make them, do them. Feedback. I guess if I'm giving feedback, I'm going to be very thoughtful, clear, and direct. Definitely not rude when I'm giving feedback. And if I'm receiving it, I try hard. I try not to take it personally. Sometimes it's not easy, but at this stage of the game, I understand that people are just coming from all sorts of different places, and or maybe they're just kind of like the translator or somebody else is telling them. So I will say with feedback, I've had some clients who are just like so darn nice. They cloak their language because they think the feedback is going to hurt my feelings. And sometimes, frankly, it just leaves me even more in the dark. Free online tools, yeah. I've got a list, and I think we'll have some in the Google Doc too. I will just say real quick about the open source apps for replacements for Photoshop and such. They're not silver bullets. You do need to definitely spend some time, invest some time and attention to really get them to do what you want them to do. Just a couple of the assets where I get stuff. This is what I was talking about with the color contrast checker. This webaim.org has a great color contrast checker. And so I think that'll wrap me up. And Katie, tell me what I should do next.
Hi, Todd. That was great. Thank you so much. I think we have lots of questions coming in. We're reading all of them, just so you guys know. Keep them coming. I think, Todd, if you want to stop sharing, Bethany will take over. And some of the questions, if I can answer them, if we can, we're doing it real time. But some of them, I'm telling you that we will come back to that during the Q&A portion. So Bethany, if you're good to go, I'm going to go ahead and mute myself.
Okay, thank you so much, Katie and Todd. And while I get my presentation started, I'd love to know who is joining us today. So go ahead and type in the chat if you're an educator or teacher, K-12 or higher ed, it doesn't matter. Instructional designer, tell me if you're an ID. Maybe we have some graphic designers in the audience as well. So let me get my screen here organized. Let me check the chat. Okay, that's pretty much what I predicted. A lot of educators. Fantastic. Okay, so you just saw this terrific slide deck from Todd. He is a graphic designer. When Todd and I were talking about this presentation and co-presenting together, I said, Todd, I'm not a graphic designer. I'm a teacher. So my slide deck is really talking about the other part of it. Why you would use graphics and visuals in education, how it helps that learning process. And I specifically made all of my slides pretty doable. Okay, so if you're sitting there on the side of your screen and you just saw that amazing slide deck from Todd and you're thinking, I don't know if I have those abilities to put in graphics like that, but you're taking away the principles. I'm actually going to do a practice a little bit of meta communication throughout my slide deck to kind of say, this was a very simple thing, and here's how I did it, so that you walk away from this thinking, I understand the principles that we talked about, and that you can put it in place in your courses, no matter what level you're at in terms of using graphics and visuals. So I want to focus on three things today. First and foremost, the instructional value of using visuals, especially in online courses. So I'm from Quality Matters. If you don't know QM, we really look at the quality of online courses specifically so that your students have the very best online learning experience that they can have with you and at your institution. So we're going to talk about that, the pedagogy behind this, and then types and examples of visual elements. And I kind of catered this specifically to visual elements that you might use when creating online lectures, for example. And then finally, some considerations and resources, including accessibility, because I know we had a question about that in the chat. So first, let's talk about that instructional value portion. Online learning is visual, right? this is something probably that seems obvious, but I don't know that we always treat it that way when we're creating online learning. For those of you like myself that have been in online learning for decades, if you started this in the 90s or even a little bit before, when online learning, especially asynchronous learning, first really emerged and started to become more mainstream, it was very text-based. We didn't have all the great options that we have now in our learning management systems. I don't know that we always saw it as a multimedia opportunity, but definitely today, online learning is visual. And think about it this way. How many times have you created or taken an online class and there wasn't some sort of visual element attached to it? I have seen classes, again, from decades ago that were really just text, lots of PDF on the screen. And at that point, it's not a learning system, it's really a content repository. So what we want to do is really take full advantage of all of the opportunities we have online to use visuals. So to really understand the power and the impact of visuals in learning, I want to talk a little bit first about a theory. This is Clark and Mayer, the cognitive theory of multimedia learning. And I've really simplified the process here on the screen, but essentially what happens is you see or hear something. So you're taking in that multimedia, that piece of multimedia. And that could be pictures that you're seeing. It could be words that you're hearing. It could also be words that you're seeing on the screen. And so you process that through, your senses, ears and your eyes. Then your working memory is working hard, trying to organize that information. Your brain is trying to determine, is it relevant? Do I need to keep this? And your brain's also trying to connect it to past information, right? To anchor that, because that's going to give it a better shot of staying in that long-term memory. So that's where integration happens. But think about the difference when you see pictures versus when you see words. When you're looking at words on a screen, your brain first sees it as an image. It has to then interpret the meaning of that image, move it into, okay, this is a word. I now need to think about the meaning of that word. Whereas when you see a visual, you don't have to go through that extra step. This is a simplified way of thinking about it, but essentially your brain more easily and more quickly makes sense of that image, meaning it then gets into your brain a little bit quicker for that processing part. So a big takeaway here is that visuals can help to make learning stick. Because when you accompany a good visual, meaning a relevant visual, an appropriate visual, to augment what you're saying, to support and reinforce what you're saying, you're tapping two channels of the brain. So it's that dual channel part of that multimedia theory that it's getting deeper embedded into your brain because your brain is working with it in various ways. So you can see here, this is a little bit of meta communication. I have a very simple picture of a Scotch tape reel, right? And this is an Adobe stock image. You can get 10 for free. Otherwise, it's usually about $3 per image. But the idea here is that I'm showing you something about stickiness, and hopefully that's going to help make it stick better in your brain. That years from now, you're going to remember, oh, I saw this presentation, it had tape deck on it, and visuals help make that learning stick. Visuals also help the brain make meaning of what we're seeing or hearing or really interacting with, because the brain processes visual information before you engage in text. And think of it this way: when you're looking at this slide that I have on the screen, and this is another stock photo, did you look at the visual before you read the block of text? Now, there have been studies on it. Iger, for example, in 2018 did a really nice eye tracking study on this, and they wanted to see where people looked when they're faced with something like this, specifically a headline, a box of text, and an image. And they found, far and above, that there was this learning path that the eye followed, not even consciously, but they looked at the headline, then they looked at the visual, and they tried to make sense of that. Then finally, they went to the text. So that's also saying that not only do we attend to visual images, more frequently or before we look at the text, but there's also this path that our brain follows because we are trying to make connections between what we're reading on the screen and what we're seeing on the screen. So that's another support for saying those visuals should reinforce what you're saying and really should give some support to that. And here's another example. Okay, so you can see there's a triangle and then there's a box of text that describes that. It's a lot easier for your brain to look at that red triangle and say, oh, red triangle, easy, I understand. When you look at the text, though, you have to read it, you have to understand those letters, those words, and then you have to visualize what that object might look like. So that's just another very quick and simple example. But visuals and the brain really are like this nice, happy marriage. It's what your brain goes for first. It processes more quickly. 90% of the info that is transmitted to the brain is visual because, again, words are first visual before we interpret them and understand them. Our brain also processes visuals much more quickly than text. There is a number that's been thrown around for years, something like 60,000 times more quickly than text. And that did come from an MIT professor, Philip Cooper, but it has not been cited in the literature. So I feel safe in saying that the brain processes visuals much faster than text, but not giving a number. But now you know why that happens, why we do process it faster, because we're not trying to parse out letters, words, language, and meaning, as opposed to just seeing that visual. Visuals also can help to increase learning recall. So this is a visual here. I've created a simple table using the table option here in PowerPoint. And you can see there that depending on the presentation type, whether it's spoken lecture, written, meaning it's something that you or your students are simply reading, something that's visual and verbal. So what we're doing today, an illustrated lecture, or participatory. Hands-on, really applied learning. We know that we love that, especially in online classes. We know that helps learning. But look at that ability to recall there on the right. After 3 hours, even with that, visual and verbal outpaces written and reading. But look at after 3 days. Look at that final column there. And that's what we're talking about. The ability to move a piece of information from that working memory into your long-term memory so that it sticks. And we need that information to stick. So especially if you teach a class that is a prerequisite for other classes, is a foundational class in the major, for example, you need that learning to stick. So one way to do that is to increase the odds that it's going to by using visuals. And then I don't want to leave out that last line, that applied learning as well also will help it move from that working memory into long-term memory. Visuals also are incredibly connected to emotions and motivation. So emotions can be produced simply by a visual, and emotions are something that heighten our awareness. It makes our brain pay attention. It can also be motivating. Visuals are also related to credibility when we're talking about online course design. So there have been several studies looking at websites, not specifically education, but asking folks based on the design of this website, web page, PowerPoints, etc. How do you feel about the organization of the person that created it, right? So there's several studies, but they all the same outcome, that it really does, to a high degree, play into that person's interpretation of the credibility of the creator. So when your students are taking your online class, and you're using visuals well, or you have an online lecture such as this that you're giving, and the visuals are nicely augmenting and reinforcing that text, that actually enhances your credibility as an instructor. That really does make your students feel like, well, this person knows what they're talking about, right? But with that, if you combine the emotions and the motivation and the relevance, that also increases cognitive engagement. And very simply, think about it this way, because we've all attended webinars or presentations where it was a very text-heavy PowerPoint slide deck. Let's say that as an example. No visuals at all. And you're reading the screen, and you can read faster than they could talk. So you're done reading, they're still talking, there's no visuals. At some point, you're kind of bored, you tune out. It's been called death by PowerPoint. That's what we're talking about here. You don't want that. You do want to use visuals wisely to help keep your students cognitively engaged. So let's move on to the second portion here, types and examples of visual elements. So types of visual elements, and Todd talked about this as well, and he gave a lot of great ideas. Storyboards or cartoons. There's actually lots of places where you can create cartoons for your class. There's a site, some sites that we know that we will put on the Google Doc that we're going to crowdsource with you and fill out and share. Charts and diagrams. So this might be, something even that you copy from a textbook in your discipline or that you create yourself. Maps, and not just geographical maps, but also concept maps, mind maps, hand-drawn pictures or illustrations that you as the instructor might create, word clouds or word webs, illustrations and icons. And that last bullet point there, those are not specifically graphics, but they are visuals. So I didn't want to leave those out, even though, we're talking mainly about graphics, but screencasts, videos, using virtuals and simulations and 3D models and animations. Those are all additional visual elements that you can add to your online classes. And thankfully, so many free and good options for these are available today. So I'm going to give you some examples of how this can play out using some things related to online learning, since we're online and a lot of you are educators. So many of you might have already heard about the community of inquiry framework. This is a very simple Venn diagram. So this is an example of a diagram that I created using PowerPoint's built-in smart chart tool. So it tells students very simply what the community of inquiry is about. It talks about those three facets. They can see that visual on the screen as I continue talking about it and unpacking those individual elements. Here's another one. So if you're familiar with Quality Matters or you're familiar with good instructional design, you're familiar with the concept of alignment. So this graphic is one that we use a lot in our professional development in QM. Everything is really foundational to those measurable learning objectives. And there's a visual then that shows individuals what that means. It makes a little analogy, or metaphor there that you're building something. Those learning objectives are the foundation. Your assessments are what students achieve, and then everything else serves to support students doing well in those assessments, including your content, your learning activities, and your course tools. So again, this was a very simple graphic that was created, but it helps to put that picture, that image in your mind of what do I mean when I say learning objectives are foundation. They're the foundation of your design. Another example, and this was when during a presentation I was talking about the difference between remote learning and purposefully designed good online learning. And these are just icons that you can use. They're available within PowerPoint. They're free to use. So that first one, it's an idea, trying to get those gears moving in your brain. Online design is purposeful. That's a big distinguishment from that remote learning. Migrating our face-to-face materials online and calling it a day and saying that's an online class, that's a no, right? Spending time on design before the class begins, that's what allows you to have that time for active teaching. And so I put a clock there, like you are going to be spending your time, but it is time well spent. And then finally, this is something we talk about a lot in QM, and this is going to resonate with IDs as well as instructors. This idea of the online quality pie. Course design is just one part of your students having a high quality and well-supported online experience. There's also delivery, content, faculty readiness, student readiness, all that kind of good stuff. So let's round it out with just a couple considerations and resources. Choosing good visuals. And here I'm really building on what Todd has already really expertly talked about. When you're choosing visuals for your course, especially your online lectures, focus on those core ideas that you really want students to come away with, those takeaway 3 to 5 big ideas, or something that can also promote deeper understanding or deeper thinking of an idea or topic or theory or theme. Todd also mentioned looking with an eye towards diversity and representation. And, in some cases, that really means look at the images, especially of the people that you're using. When you're showing somebody that's in a position of power, like an instructor, is it the same demographic? Is it the same age and gender and ethnicity? Try to broaden that representation so that students can see themselves reflected in your course with the visuals that you choose to use. Also, readability. So don't make them too small. Watch out for colors and fonts, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. Some cautions: poor quality videos. If you're trying to, and Todd mentioned this as well, blow up something that really is not high quality enough, but it gets blurry. Ones that are generic or overused. Using too many visuals, and especially using extraneous visuals. So the brain's still going to go to those extraneous visuals and try to make sense of it and say, is it relevant? Is it meaningful? And if it's really not meaningful, it's distracting, right? You're essentially using some of that cognitive load to take it up with an image that's really just there for aesthetics. So the accessibility, and I know we had a question in the chat about this, creating alternative text descriptions for images. This is really important. Make sure, though, that they're concise and descriptive. But without creating an alt tag here, screen readers are going to read, for example, the source file instead of a descriptive image. So you have to put that in. And I have an example here. This, putting the alt description in as pizza, it's accurate, but it's not entirely descriptive. Let me give you the alternative: slice of pineapple pizza. And that might matter because maybe I'm talking about opinions that are controversial and people, are very fervent one way or the other, even though it's not that important. And pineapple pizza is something like that. You either like pineapple pizza or you don't. So it's important there to really be descriptive when we give those alt tags. Also consider color. So you will have students that are colorblind, and that doesn't mean that you can't use images of a certain color, but it does mean do not rely solely on color to convey information. So what's pictured there is how a colorblind individual would see red, yellow, light blue, etc. And contrasting that, the red and the green, they come out as the same color. So just an example here, let's say that I want to put something in my course that designates that students stop at a certain point, and I just want to put this red 8-sided figure thinking, well, everybody will interpret that as a stop sign, of course. Not if you're colorblind. If you're colorblind, what you see is this, and that doesn't tell me to stop. It doesn't really tell me anything. So what can I do in this scenario? I could simply put the word stop in the middle so that students that cannot see the red color, then I am not using color solely to convey that information. And again, use high contrast for readability. So prior to that, that sentence was in yellow, and I've seen this in online courses, a light yellow because you want to highlight something on a white screen, it doesn't come through. So 3 takeaways there: using visuals taps into dual channels. It helps that learning stick, that information stick. You can enhance your online lectures and other materials with images, graphics, also videos as well, and create or curate these high quality visuals with an eye towards accessibility, and then also making sure that you put in those alt tag descriptions. Finally, I just wanted to mention that you could also use visuals as a map. So that's what Todd and I both did in our presentations. We had that visual at the beginning saying we're going to talk about 3 things. That was continued out through the segmented portions of our presentation. You may have noticed I used the same icons in the beginning as I did in the 3 takeaways. So think about visuals in that way as well to provide sort of guidance on your students' learning path. And also you can use it to help illustrate process steps. If you would like to learn more about designing really quality online courses, Quality Matters does have a freely available, so it's free to the public. It's called the Bridge to Quality Course Design Guide. And it was really created to help instructors move from hastily done, but the very best that everybody could do with the time allowed, but that remote learning, and move that into purposefully created high quality online learning. There is a section, so I marked it here, Phase 2, Section B, that focuses really on content, including images. So the Bridge to Quality Course Design Guide includes actionable design steps. So we give you some guidance for what to think about or what to do in that step. But it also focuses on alignments, It also has modality considerations, so for synchronous and high flex, for example, and it also has call outs if you're in that emergency remote situation. Hopefully you won't be in that again, but it also has specific guidance for that as well. So with that, that is my portion. I'm going to stop at this point, and Katie, let's see what questions we have.
We have a lot. We have a lot of questions. So I want to start with just a few things. There's no way we're going to be able to answer them all. So thank you. Some of them all of them, they're just amazing. So before we get started, some of you already jumped the gun. If you saw this, we are starting crowdsourcing a document. And we can expand this to have other topics. So I'm going to put it, if you haven't seen it yet, some of you guys, if you've been looking at the Q&A, make sure I can't do two things at once. Okay, so we're crowdsourcing a document. I just put it in the chat. Everyone should be able to view this. Right now I have two or three categories. So one is stock photography or databases that, might have a fee that you guys really like. If you want to add a little annotation, don't worry about if it's messy. We'll clean it up later. The second part is just if there's openly licensed. Sometimes openly licensed is free, sometimes it's not. So I didn't want to put free. But if you guys, a lot of you guys had suggestions, and then I think I put something on color because we were getting so many great suggestions for color wheels and all of that. So go ahead while we're addressing the questions. So, all right. I answered a lot as many as I could, just so you guys know, whatever we don't get to, we will follow up. And before I get to the questions, three more things. Everyone is going to get a copy of the recording. Everyone is going to get a little tip sheet, and then we'll also clean up the resources page. All right, so let's see. This is kind of a general one that I'm going to ask both Bethany and Todd, and I think this kind of captures a couple different questions. How do you balance the importance of visuals and what we know pedagogically with the difficulty with screen readers and so many students that are using, assistive technology tools and the difficulty of reading those? Do you want to start, Bethany? A lot of people, asked some variation of that.
Yes, I see that question repeated. The exact question I was going to tackle first was, how do you balance that with minimizing extraneous cognitive load? I think, same idea. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So if your visuals are reinforcing what you're saying, you're actually helping the brain. You're not increasing that cognitive load. You are increasing that cognitive load, though, for example, when the visual doesn't match what you're saying. So you're not helping the brain. You're increasing cognitive load when you have a lot of text on the screen and there's no visual. That's even worse. But also think in terms of, how is something going to help your students learn? So let me give the example of a math class. It might actually reduce cognitive load if I post a screencast, for example, of me working out a problem, and I'm talking about my thinking as I work out the problem. So even though that's a lot of visual stimulation coming in at one time, it might reduce cognitive load because my students aren't looking at a finished problem and thinking, well, how did my instructor get there, right? And then they also have math anxiety and maybe a fixed mindset, and those are also things that increase that cognitive load. So think in terms of pairing your visuals with the written information in order to make it better for the brain. And that means small amount of text, reinforcing visual, chunk it up, short presentations. Todd, I'm sure you have something really good to add to that too.
I'm not an educator, but I guess one thing I might say is, like in my presentation, how I was trying to use images to compare certain ideas to things. So like the in the arrangement principle for graphic design, and using the place settings and having a picture of all the different types of place settings, just to kind of create something that people could connect with, I guess.
Mm-hmm. So another one, I'm doing housekeeping now and then. If the Google Doc has this is a huge webinar. We're so excited. The Google Doc is, hopefully we might have overloaded it. That's okay. Just remember, we'll send you this link in the follow-up. So even after this, you can add information. So a lot of people ask for information on how to write alt text. And so I'm going to give a resource. Jim, if you have one, this is one that I really like from WebAIM. It's a lot of information, but I just feel like it kind of talks about a lot of different scenarios. So I just want to let you guys know, I put it as an answer in a lot of the questions, but I just wanted everyone to have that also in the chat if you want to check this out. Okay, so Todd, here's a question for you that I thought was interesting. Do you have, I mean, I know there's, we have templates and everything, but someone had asked, like, do you have recommendations or fonts that you like to pair, different headings or, just font families that you think are pretty safe? So for someone who's really not a designer, are there just like certain combinations, like this is a good heading 1 and heading 2 that you think are good go-tos? That was a couple of people asked me that.
Well, I would say in the context of PowerPoint, whenever I'm working on PowerPoint projects, majority of the time I'm using fonts that are universally available, like standard system fonts. And if you are in PowerPoint and you go to set up your design initially, it actually gives you helpful pairings of fonts and for like heads and for body text. So a lot of times it might be like the same font for both, but just different weights, or it might be like a bold sans serif for the headline and then some text for the, like a serif for the text type. So that's what came to mind right off the top of my head. Okay.
Thanks. I think Sandra had asked that. Another one, just Todd, while I have you here, and then we'll maybe switch to ones that Bethany can answer. What do you think about, like, what's your preference on picture format? JPEG, PNG, GIF or GIF, whatever, whichever way you're calling that, TIFF?
So like a TIFF, those files can get really huge. And generally I've used those mainly for big print projects. And even now I don't use them that much. JPEGs are kind of the good all around file format to go to. It works for most images and it also compresses them. You just have to pay attention to how much it compresses it, because then it can start to lose quality. PNGs are excellent for keeping the quality of something, of an image, and especially if you want to have some transparency, like if you want to put a logo over a colored background or something. But those files can get a little big. It's all relative, file size wise nowadays, but just comparing them.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so this is a question. There's one question I think I can answer. Again, we'll follow up if we don't get to it. Bethany, so a couple of people asked about the syllabus. Is there, did you have any tips or best practices or examples for someone who's trying to design a syllabus, to make it visually appealing, make it accessible, and just make it just really easy to read?
That's a very good question. I think especially in recent years, there have been a lot of really good conversations on visual syllabi. It's called different names. I have seen some fantastic examples of it. My cautionary note for this is it still needs to be accessible. And that is the problem that I've seen time and time again when instructors work to create these dynamic syllabi. And really what this means is connect with your student accessibility office at your institution and say, can we look at this through a screen reader? I don't want my my blind or low vision students to be disadvantaged or to miss anything in the syllabus simply because I want this good visual layout. So when we start using tables, for example, or inserting images, into a document, then it becomes a PDF. Just make sure that the information still can be read by a screen reader, and that your low vision students and blind students aren't missing anything. And there was a related question, Katie, if I could piggyback off of this. There was a related question in the text saying, you're thinking about doing this, but you really want that equitable learning for students that are blind or low vision, even if we're talking about online lectures, for example. So, for that, I would say if you are recording these as a recorded online lecture for an asynchronous course, It may, take you aback a minute, but I'm a big fan of writing a script so that you're very concise in what you say. Online lectures, ideally 10 minutes or less, but that script then becomes a transcript for that individual slide. So another way to do this, if you're not up to doing a scripted presentation at this time, you can always use software as well, like Dragon Naturally Speaking. Screencast-O-Matic will do an auto transcription. YouTube will as well. For all of these, though, you need to then check the transcription. It is never 100% accurate. So a little bit extra added step for you. But then what you can do is each slide has that transcript. So even if you're trying to reduce some of that text on the screen in favor of adding a visual that's going to accompany it, when you have that transcript, first of all, your blind or low vision students will get, everything that you're saying, regardless of whether or not you reduce text on the screen. But that's where you also provide a full description of the image, right, to help reinforce what you're saying. So accessibility really is a big consideration. You do need to be thoughtful about it so that all students have the same equal opportunity with learning. So for this, I definitely suggest, again, connecting with your Student Accessibility Services office. I know we've also shared some links in the chat that talk specifically about accessibility for images.
Mm-hmm. So one person had, a couple of people had asked if they could see an example. So I'm just going to take a minute. I can show you just a page or two that blends together. Give me 1 second. I'm going to share my screen. Blends together what Bethany and Todd have said. Can everyone, you guys can see my screen? So this, in this case, just in terms of the font, choosing the font, this is actually in the CourseArc software. The font has been set through the theme. So this was something that, Bethany and Todd talked about. Yes, you might not have the design background, but if you can work with someone and create a theme, then it can be reused. So you can see the heading, the font, that's all been set up. This is an example of the chunking. And then in terms of creating just a visual, something to pop on the page. This is from one of the courses that we offer on instructional design. This is called a standout block. So we just want it to pop on the page, right? So this is a job aid that you get when you're done. And so this is all accessible. You have the headers are coded correctly. And this is something that, again, it's designed once. It's called a job aid, and then anyone can use it. So I think this also is just a good practice, whatever tool or process you're using, just to try to create themes and templates, make sure that they're tested, get the insight from a designer and maybe an accessibility person if you can. And then you guys can, well, you might not be able to see my screen still, but then, it just makes it really easy. So I wanted to mention that. All right, so we have about 3 or 4 more minutes. I think we answered that one. You guys feel free. So this is one, this one's kind of hard. How about using visuals as a navigation tool? I kind of feel like as long as it passes all of the accessibility stuff and you have your tech team, test it and it's fine. I think it's, I think it's fine. Todd, Bethany?
I think in some ways it depends, what we mean by navigation tool. So is it that you're using it, for example, to segment a presentation, to lay something out numerically? But if you think about it, within an LMS, we already do use visuals in a lot of ways for navigation. You might have your modules hopefully organized by folders or learning units. You see that visual of a folder. When you open a module, hopefully you have some visual organizational component at the beginning with an introduction, what students are going to be reading, watching, and doing. I've seen a lot of courses where Read, Watch, Do has an associated icon. That's another way to use visuals for navigation. I have seen visuals used for navigation in that left-hand nav. So for those quick links, for example, using a picture of an envelope for email rather than, spelling out email. So I think a lot of these are already embedded in a lot of the learning management systems, that we're using, Canvas, D2L, Brightspace, Blackboard, those are some of the top ones, at least in higher education. So there are some visual elements embedded in that. But think about, some icons or themes that might resonate with your course design that you could use as those navigational posts, or to help with organization, or to guide students along that pathway.
Thank you. Another one, Bethany. Well, this is a funny one, but I thought this was good. Maybe we can end with this. What is everyone's philosophy on cameras on or off during a presentation? Because I thought it was interesting. Todd turned his off, and then I turned mine off, and you kept yours on. So what's your thought on that?
Two different answers if we're talking about the instructor versus students. There is research on this. I personally am not happy with the research that's on this now, because there's so much to look at. So for me, when I decided to turn my camera on when I presented, that's just a facet of who I am as a presenter. I really need to try to connect with an audience, especially with an audience that I don't see, even though it's huge and it's on the other side of my webcam. But think of it this way. The other reason I turn my camera on, and that you may want to, if you're giving a lecture in a synchronous format, over 90% of what we communicate is not just in our words alone. It is in our tone as well, which of course you can hear without the camera, but also in our nonverbals, right? In our expressions. In terms of students' cameras on, cameras off, because I think that's probably what the question was about. I know that it's easier as instructors, and it helps to prevent burnout and whatnot when we can see our students and connect with them in a synchronous format. So have a transparent conversation with your students, and know that there are very good reasons why some students may not want their cameras on. It could be because of where they are in a specific place that they can't do it. It could be they are a foster parent, and they can't run the risk of their foster child walking behind them, and they can't show that individual's image. So the bottom line here is, I would make it optional and have a transparent conversation, and just say to your students, I love to connect with you. If you can turn your camera on, I would really appreciate it. But I also understand that sometimes there are internet bandwidth issues, or there's other restrictions, and I still welcome you to the class regardless.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good answer. I like that. And everyone's weighing in on the chat. So last question, I know it's 2:01, but we'll do one last one for Todd. I just saw this. Jim asked this. I thought this was good. He wanted to know your thoughts on the consistency of visuals used, consistency and style, which I thought was a good question/point.
I usually try to keep things as consistent as possible with a visual style. If I'm looking, especially I get a lot of PowerPoints where people are using all sorts of different icons, and usually they've swiped them from all sorts of different areas on the web. And so I'll go back and actually find, those icons, but in a unified style, so that it just has a nicer presentation rather than, them jumping all around. Images also, some images, they have a certain style, and definitely consistency is good, but sometimes it's not always feasible too.
Yeah.
And just to add to that really quickly, when I am doing online lectures, I do try to either have, where I'm only using photographs that are, actual real photographs, or I'm only using images that all kind of look alike, or I'm using PowerPoint, icons. And it does help with this consistent feel, and that you're not jumping, back and forth.
Yeah. And I'm like Bethany. I'm not, I don't have a graphic design background, but one tip I had mentioned to some of you guys, I really like Canva. I do have the paid version. I like Canva a lot, but I also, if you do have a stock photography, if you're using Adobe, I know Adobe's expensive, but something similar to that, it is kind of nice if you have a little bit of money, you're doing a course, you can, just use the same artist. So if there's an illustrator or something, you like some of their images, usually you can just buy, more than one image from them. So I found that's been a really good strategy. And then it looks very professional, very clean. Okay. So again, lots of follow-up. We promise, give us some time. We will send you guys the recording. We'll send you our handout tip. Once we'll give you guys a couple days, and then we'll clean up the resource guide, and then we will follow up to everyone on your questions if we didn't answer them. All right. Thank you so much. And I'm going to stop the recording now, and take care. Thank you, Bethany. Thank you, Todd.
Thank you.
Thanks, Katie. Thanks, Todd. Thanks,
Stacy,
everyone.
Christine, Jim, everyone else who was manning
Yeah.
the chat. Thanks so much.